The old mill on the Hood River didn't stop because it was broken. It stopped because something inside it wanted silence. Then, at exactly midnight, everything went still, and in that silence, I saw him. A man standing below the loft, dressed in black clothing that looked like it belonged to another century. His fingers moved slowly through the flour, and in a voice barely louder than the river outside, he said, "Someone finally came back." I was 20 years old when my father asked for a volunteer. Back then, I still believed hard work solved everything, that problems had weight and shape and could be fixed with tools. Our family mills had operated along the Hood River for 3 generations. Small operations, independent contracts. We supplied local bakeries, farm stores, and distributors across northern Oregon. That particular year, according to publicly available crop reports, wheat yields across the region were unusually high. Orders were stacking up faster than our 3 active mills could handle, which left one option. The original Collins Mill, the oldest. The one upstream from Parkdale, half hidden by timber and fog. It hadn't operated in over 20 years. Officially, it was shut down due to structural concerns. Unofficially, no one liked talking about it. When my father mentioned reopening it, my mother went quiet. My older cousins looked at the floor. I said I'd do it. I remember my father holding my gaze a little longer than usual. "You don't have to," he said. But I already had. The road to it had nearly disappeared. Overgrown brush scratched the sides of my truck as I drove up the narrow trail. The river ran louder there, the current sharper against rocks. The mill itself stood on a slight incline, its water wheel angled into the flow. It was larger than I remembered from childhood. As a kid, it felt ancient and massive. As a 20-year-old man, it felt abandoned. The wood was gray with age. Several boards along the lower wall had rotted through. Moss crept up the foundation stones. The roof sagged slightly toward the east corner. But the structure was intact, waiting. When I stepped inside, the smell hit me first. Old flour, wet timber, stale air. The machinery was coated in dust, but it wasn't destroyed. The millstones were still aligned. The grain chute was blocked, but repairable. The belt system needed tension and oil. It didn't feel ruined. It felt paused. For 3 days, I worked from sunrise to late afternoon. I replaced boards along the loft floor, hammered new nails into beams that had loosened, cleared nests from the corners, scraped old flour buildup from the machinery teeth. The sound of tools inside that hollow building echoed strangely, like the walls were too thin to contain it. I avoided thinking about why it had been closed, but I remembered the story. My uncle, my father's younger brother, had been found dead there. They said it was natural causes. He had been alone during a late shift. No visible injuries. No disturbance. He was just gone. I pushed that memory aside and focused on the mechanics. On the 3rd afternoon, I reconnected the wheel to the gear system and let the river take over. The first rotation groaned like a deep exhale. Then the gears caught. The millstones turned. Slow, steady, alive again. I drove home that night feeling proud. Once production began, it became obvious I couldn't commute daily. Transporting grain, operating the mill, packaging flour, it required near constant attention. So I packed a cot, lantern fuel, extra food, and my grandfather's revolver. Not because I expected danger, but because isolation changes how you think. The loft was stable after repairs. From up there, I had a clear view of most of the floor through narrow cracks in the boards. The river provided constant background noise. That first night inside the mill, I slept without issue. The second night is when the pattern began. The machinery had been running for hours when I drifted to sleep. The rhythm was comforting, predictable, grinding stone against stone, water wheel turning, belts pulling in smooth repetition. Then I woke, not to a sound, to the absence of one. The mill had stopped, completely. I checked my pocket watch. 12 o'clock, exactly. I remember thinking that was strange timing. Maybe debris had jammed the wheel. Maybe the river current had slowed. Then, after 3 long minutes, the wheel creaked again. But I hadn't touched anything. The gears re-engaged. The belts tightened. The stones resumed turning. I slowly crawled to the edge of the loft and looked down. And that's when I saw him. He stood near the main flour bin. Tall, thin. His coat hung loosely, black fabric frayed at the cuffs. The style was unmistakably old, something from the late 19th century. His hands were darker than the rest of him. Not dirty, not stained. Dark like bruised stone. His fingernails were long, not monstrous. Just long enough to look wrong. He dipped his fingers into the flour and moved them slowly through it, like testing texture. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. After several minutes, he spoke. Someone finally came back. His voice was soft, almost relieved. Then he turned and walked toward the door. The machinery kept running, as if it obeyed him. I stayed awake until sunrise. Morning light makes everything feel smaller, less threatening. I told myself I'd been dreaming. Exhaustion, isolation, overactive imagination. I inspected the wheel. No mechanical faults, no evidence of tampering. The flour on the floor showed faint disturbances. But I had been working down there earlier. It proved nothing. So I stayed. It happened again. Midnight. Silence. Restart. He returned. Each night, he searched further. Behind stacked grain sacks. Near the ladder. By the door. He never rushed. Never panicked. He behaved like someone who owned the space. And each night, he spoke different words. Still empty? Not yet. Where did you go? The fourth night, he stood directly beneath the loft. I could see his face more clearly. His skin was pale. His eyes reflected lantern light strangely. And when he smiled slightly, I saw elongated front teeth, not exaggerated, but unmistakable. He didn't look up, but something told me he knew I was there. By the fifth night, fear had shifted into something else. He wasn't exploring, he was waiting, and he believed someone belonged there. The question that began forming in my mind was one I didn't want to answer. Was he looking for the same person who had once worked that mill before it closed? My uncle. On the sixth night, he stayed longer than ever. The mill stopped at midnight like clockwork. He entered moments later, but this time, instead of searching immediately, he stood still, listening. Then he walked to the ladder, placed his hand on the first rung, paused, tilted his head. The gesture felt deliberate. Testing. Then he stepped back down, smiled faintly, and left. I didn't sleep, because I understood something new. He was narrowing it down. Fear can either trap you or push you forward. By the seventh night, it couldn't remain hidden above him. If this was a man, he could be confronted. If it was something else, I needed to know. I emptied a flour sack and positioned myself inside it near the center of the mill floor. I kept the revolver steady in both hands. The machinery ran. Midnight came. The mill stopped. The silence pressed against my ears. Then the wheel restarted. Footsteps entered, closer than ever. From inside the sack, I could see faint shadows shifting. He stopped in front of me. "You stayed," he said softly. His hand pressed against the fabric. "You don't belong here." And then he tore the sack open. The sack tore open with a dry ripping sound that seemed louder than the river outside. Flour exploded into the air between us, turning the lantern light into a pale fog. For a split second, neither of us moved. He looked down at me, not surprised, not angry, curious. Up close, his face was even more unnatural than I had imagined from the loft. His skin wasn't decayed. It wasn't wounded. It was intact, almost preserved. But there was no warmth in it, no life beneath it. His eyes were deep red, not glowing, not theatrical, just darkened in a way that felt wrong for something standing and breathing. And his teeth? Longer in the front, sharper at the tips, adapted. "You're not the one," he said quietly. His voice carried disappointment. That sentence did something worse to me than fear. It implied he had been waiting for someone specific, for years, maybe decades. I don't remember deciding to pull the trigger. I only remember the weight of the revolver in my hands and the sudden understanding that if I hesitated, I might not get another chance. I fired once. The shot cracked through the mill, echoing violently off the beams. He staggered back, not collapsing, not reacting like any man I had ever seen. But as if mildly pushed by force he hadn't expected, I fired again, then a third time. The flour in the air ignited into chaos, swirling around us like white smoke. He shielded his face briefly, not in pain, in irritation, and that expression changed everything. The bullets had affected him, but not enough. His eyes sharpened, focused, on me. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran. The mill floor felt uneven under my boots as I sprinted toward the door. I nearly slipped on spilled flour. The night air outside hit my lungs like ice. Behind me, I heard no scream, no pursuit, just the steady turning of the water wheel, as if nothing had happened. That silence scared me more than footsteps would have. I reached my truck, hands shaking so badly I dropped the keys once before getting them into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I didn't look back at the mill, not once. The road down toward Parkdale felt longer than ever. Every shadow between the trees looked like movement. Every bend in the road made me check the rearview mirror. There was nothing behind me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something no longer needed to chase, because it already knew where I belonged. It was close to 2 a.m. when I reached home near Parkdale. The house lights were still on. My father opened the door before I knocked. Later, he said he had woken up suddenly around midnight, uneasy for reasons he couldn't explain. I stepped inside, covered in flour, my hands still trembling. My mother gasped when she saw me. I told them everything, every detail. The machinery stopping at midnight, the searching, the words he spoke, the face, the teeth, the bullets. No one interrupted. No one dismissed it as stress or imagination. When I finished, my father sat down slowly at the kitchen table. There was a silence in the room, heavier than anything in that mill. Then he said something that changed how I saw our family's history. "When your uncle was found," he began carefully, "the coroner couldn't explain it. He had been alone in the mill during a late shift more than 20 years earlier. There were no signs of struggle, no broken boards, no disturbance. But according to the official notes, which my father had quietly kept copies of, there had been severe blood loss. without external injury. At the time, it had been attributed to internal causes, an undetected condition, a medical anomaly. The mill closed shortly after, not because of structural damage, but because no one wanted to work there again. And over time, the story faded into something the family simply avoided, until I reopened it. At first light, we drove back together. My father, my two older cousins, and me. The river along the Hood River looked calm, peaceful. The mill stood exactly as it had the night before. No visible damage from the gunshots, no broken windows, no sign of forced entry. Inside, flour coated the floor in a thin, even layer, except near the center. There, disturbances were visible. Footprints, mine and others. His were faint but present, bare impressions that didn't fully sink into the flour, as if whatever weight he carried wasn't quite normal. They led toward the door, out onto the damp ground. We followed them cautiously. They continued toward the riverbank and stopped, right at the water's edge. There were no return tracks, no sign of struggle, no indication of direction beyond that point, just the river. My father stared at the water for a long time. Then he said quietly, "We should have left it alone." We didn't debate. We didn't investigate further. We didn't involve authorities because there was nothing tangible to report. Only impressions and flour, and a story no one outside the family would believe. By mid-morning, my father had made calls. By noon, heavy equipment was on its way. We would dismantle the mill completely, not repair it, not seal it, remove it. Watching that structure come apart felt like erasing a chapter of our history. The water wheel was taken down first. Its old wood cracked as it hit the ground. Then the outer walls were pulled free beam by beam. Dust filled the air. The loft collapsed last. The place where I had hidden for 6 nights. The place where I had watched something that shouldn't exist search for someone who never returned. As the final support beam gave way, I felt something unexpected. Not relief, not victory, but interruption, as if something unfinished had been disturbed again. By sunset, nothing remained but a flattened clearing beside the river. No foundation, no machinery, just earth, and the steady sound of water. Life continued after that. The other mills remained operational. We adjusted production schedules. We hired additional seasonal help. Business stabilized. But something had changed inside me. I began noticing small details differently. The way machinery sounds when it's about to stop. The exact timing of midnight. The silence that comes before something moves. There's one part of that night I rarely speak about. When he looked at me and said, "You're not the one." I've replayed that sentence countless times over the years. Who was he waiting for? My uncle? Someone older? Or someone yet to come? And what would have happened if I hadn't fired? If I had stayed still? If I had let him decide what I was? Those are questions I don't explore for long. Because curiosity is what reopened that mill in the first place. I never returned to that clearing along the Hood River alone again. The land eventually grew over where the structure once stood. Trees reclaimed the space. Grass covered the flattened earth. To anyone passing by now, it's just another quiet bend in the river. But every winter, when the nights stretch longer and the air turns sharp, I find myself thinking about the exact moment the machinery stopped.